One wrong decision can end a traffic stop, but sometimes it can also end a career. The voice over the police radio cracked through the cool midnight air as flashing blue lights reflected across the empty highway, painting the asphalt with restless waves of color that stretched for what seemed like miles. Officer Ethan Brooks stepped out of his cruiser with the quiet confidence of a man who believed the badge on his chest answered every question before anyone else had the chance to speak. For nearly 17 years, he had worked the same county roads outside Richmond, Virginia, convinced that experience had sharpened his instincts beyond doubt. Tonight felt no different. Ahead of him sat a black luxury sedan pulled safely onto the shoulder, its engine humming softly beneath the glow of nearby streetlights. Inside, Danielle Carter rested both hands calmly on the steering wheel exactly where they could be seen. She had been driving home after an exhausting 14-hour day, the kind of day that left even the strongest coffee unable to keep fatigue away. Her leather briefcase rested neatly on the passenger seat beside a stack of sealed government folders. She hadn't expected to carry this late into the evening. Her phone vibrated again with another message she ignored, choosing instead to focus on the approaching footsteps reflected in her side mirror. Brooks adjusted his flashlight and stopped beside her window, his expression already hardened before a single word had been exchanged. "License and registration," he said flatly. Danielle nodded politely and reached slowly toward her purse. Before her fingers even touched the zipper, Brooks interrupted with a sharper tone. "Keep your hands where I can see them." She immediately complied, lifting both hands back onto the steering wheel without argument. A passing pickup truck slowed slightly before continuing down the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the silent encounter. Danielle waited patiently until Brooks instructed her again to retrieve her documents. Every movement she made was careful, measured, deliberate. She handed over her driver's license without hesitation, maintaining steady eye contact, while speaking in the calm voice of someone accustomed to remaining composed under pressure. Brooks studied the license longer than necessary, glancing from the card back to Danielle several times. Something about her confidence seemed to irritate him more than reassure him. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Work," Danielle answered. "What kind of work keeps someone out this late?" Brooks continued. Danielle offered a faint, courteous smile. "Federal legal work." Brooks let out a short laugh that carried more skepticism than amusement. "Federal, huh?" he muttered while shining his flashlight across the dashboard and into the back seat. "That's interesting." Danielle remained silent. The distant sound of another patrol vehicle echoed somewhere beyond the tree line, fading almost as quickly as it arrived. Brooks walked around the sedan once, studying every window before returning to her door. "Step out of the vehicle," he instructed. Danielle looked at him for a brief moment, neither fearful nor confrontational, only quietly puzzled. "Officer," she said gently, "may I ask why?" Brooks' expression never softened. "Because I'm giving you a lawful order." Danielle slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped onto the shoulder exactly as instructed, standing beneath the flashing lights with remarkable composure while cool summer air drifted across the empty highway. She folded her hands calmly in front of her and looked directly at the officer. Then, in a voice so steady it barely rose above the sound of passing traffic, she asked a question that neither of them realized would soon change everything. "Officer Brooks, are you absolutely certain you want this stop to continue?" Danielle did not answer immediately. She simply held Officer Brooks' gaze with the same quiet composure she had carried since the flashing lights first appeared behind her. There was no frustration in her expression, no fear, and certainly no attempt to challenge his authority. It was almost as if she understood something that everyone else on that lonely stretch of highway had yet to discover. Brooks interpreted her silence differently. To him, confidence looked suspicious. He had convinced himself years ago that people who stayed too calm during a traffic stop were usually hiding something, and every second Danielle remained composed only strengthened that belief in his mind. He took another slow look around the vehicle, letting his flashlight drift across the polished paint, the spotless interior, and the leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat. Everything appeared organized with unusual precision. There were no scattered receipts, no clutter, no signs of carelessness. The sedan looked less like the car of someone rushing home and more like the workspace of a disciplined professional. Yet, instead of easing his concerns, that order only deepened his suspicion. Danielle remained standing beside the shoulder line as cool air swept across the highway. In the distance, tractor-trailers rolled steadily along the interstate, their engines producing a low, constant hum that blended with the rhythmic pulse of the patrol car's emergency lights. Every few minutes, another driver slowed slightly, curious about the scene before continuing into the darkness. Somewhere nearby, a cricket chirped beneath the sound of passing traffic, reminding Danielle how strangely peaceful the night would have been without the interruption. Brooks opened the driver's door and carefully examined the interior once more. His attention settled on the sealed folders inside the briefcase. Each carried official markings that he recognized only vaguely. He could not read every detail from where he stood, but the formal appearance immediately caught his attention. Danielle noticed his eyes linger on the documents. Calmly, she spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. "Those materials contain privileged government information. Please be careful with them." Brooks glanced back at her, raising an eyebrow. "Government information?" he repeated with unmistakable doubt. "That is correct," Danielle answered evenly. "They are work files." Brooks gave a quiet scoff before returning his attention to the vehicle. In his mind, the explanation sounded rehearsed rather than truthful. He had encountered countless people over the years who claimed impressive careers or important positions whenever they found themselves facing uncomfortable questions. He believed this was simply another version of the same story. Danielle folded her hands gently in front of her, saying nothing more. She had learned long ago that arguments rarely changed assumptions already made. Across hundreds of courtrooms and conference rooms, patience had often spoken louder than emotion. Tonight would be no different. Her phone vibrated again inside her purse. The screen briefly illuminated with another incoming message before fading back into darkness. Brooks noticed it but made no effort to ask who was calling. Instead, he focused on his own conclusions. The county dispatcher spoke softly through his shoulder radio, requesting a routine status update. Brooks responded with practiced confidence, assuring dispatch that everything was under control and that he was continuing his investigation. Danielle listened quietly, her eyes drifting toward the endless highway stretching beneath the moonlit sky. She thought about the meeting waiting for her in just a few hours, about the people expecting her arrival, and about the files that represented months of careful preparation. Time was slipping away 1 minute at a time. Still, her voice remained calm when she finally spoke again. "Officer Brooks," she said gently, "before this goes any further, I would strongly encourage you to verify exactly who you are speaking with." Officer Brooks slowly lowered the flashlight, but his expression remained unchanged. Danielle's words did not sound like a threat. They sounded like advice. Somehow that irritated him even more. In his experience, people either became nervous or argumentative during a roadside stop. Danielle had done neither. She stood beneath the alternating flashes of red and blue light with the quiet confidence of someone who understood every step of the process. To Brooks, that confidence felt misplaced. "I already know exactly who I am talking to," he replied firmly. "Right now, you are the driver I stopped, and I am conducting this investigation." Danielle gave a slight nod without interrupting him. "I understand," she answered. "Then I respectfully ask that you verify my identity through the proper channels before making any further decisions." Brooks folded his arms for a brief moment before speaking again. "You keep mentioning your identity as if it changes the situation." Danielle looked directly at him. "It does not change the law," she said calmly, "but it may change your understanding of what is happening here." Those words lingered in the night air. Brooks turned away without responding and walked back toward his patrol vehicle. Inside, he placed Danielle's driver's license beside the keyboard mounted between the front seats. The computer screen cast a pale glow across his face as he began entering her information into the system. Outside, Danielle remained exactly where she had been instructed to stand. She neither shifted impatiently nor attempted to use her phone. Her eyes followed the distant stream of headlights moving steadily along the interstate while the cool Virginia breeze carried the scent of pine trees from the wooded area nearby. She quietly reminded herself to stay focused. Months of preparation had taught her that composure was often more powerful than confrontation. A pair of teenagers driving home from a late basketball practice slowed briefly as they passed the traffic stop. One glanced through the passenger window before the car disappeared into the darkness. Moments later, another family vehicle passed, its young children looking curiously at the flashing lights before their parents continued down the highway. To everyone driving by, it looked like another ordinary traffic stop. No one could have imagined how quickly the situation was moving toward a turning point. Brooks stared at the computer screen, waiting for additional records to load. Basic registration information appeared first. Then another notification flashed across the monitor requesting secondary verification because of federal credentials associated with the registered owner. Brooks frowned. He tapped the keyboard again, assuming the system had made an error. A second notification appeared almost immediately, instructing him to contact dispatch before taking additional enforcement action. Brooks leaned back in his seat, letting out a quiet breath. He had seen similar notices before involving judges, active law enforcement officers, and other public officials, but he refused to jump to conclusions. Plenty of people carried government identification, he reminded himself. That alone did not impress him. He reached for the shoulder microphone attached to his uniform but hesitated for only a second before placing it back down. Instead, he stepped out of the cruiser and walked toward Danielle once again. "Where exactly did you say you worked?" he asked. Danielle answered with the same measured tone she had maintained since the beginning. "The United States Attorney's Office." Brooks narrowed his eyes. "Doing what?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "Serving the public." The answer was truthful but incomplete. Brooks noticed that immediately. "That is not what I asked," he replied. Danielle remained composed. "No," she said softly. "It is simply the answer I am prepared to give until my identity has been officially verified." For the first time that evening, Brooks felt a small flicker of uncertainty. It was subtle, almost invisible, but enough to make him glance back toward the glowing computer screen inside his patrol vehicle, where another unopened notification had just appeared. Officer Brooks walked back toward his cruiser without another word, the gravel beneath his boots crunching softly in the stillness of the night. Behind him, Danielle remained exactly where she had been asked to stand. Her posture relaxed despite the uncertainty stretching from one passing minute to the next. She watched the patrol car from a distance, saying nothing as another warm summer breeze carried the scent of fresh rain drifting in from somewhere beyond the tree line. The emergency lights continued their endless rhythm, bathing the quiet highway in alternating shades of blue and red that reflected across the polished surface of her sedan. Inside the cruiser, Brooks opened the newest system notification. Instead of the detailed information he expected, the screen displayed another instruction directing him to contact dispatch for restricted verification. He frowned again. Over the years he had encountered judges, state legislators, federal employees, and even retired law enforcement officials. None of them had received this level of restricted handling during an ordinary records check. He tapped the steering wheel impatiently before finally pressing the transmit button on his shoulder microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need secondary verification on a driver's credentials." The dispatcher acknowledged the request with a calm voice and asked him to stand by. Brooks leaned back in his seat, convinced the response would confirm his own assumptions within seconds. Outside, Danielle quietly glanced toward the sky. Thin clouds drifted across the moon, softening its light as traffic became lighter with each passing minute. Her phone vibrated once more inside her purse. She knew exactly who was probably trying to reach her. Somewhere downtown, a conference room remained occupied. Several attorneys, investigators, and support staff were almost certainly wondering why she had not arrived when expected. She resisted every temptation to explain the delay herself. Instead, she trusted the system she had spent years serving. Brooks stepped out of the cruiser again while waiting for dispatch to respond. "Do you travel this road often?" he asked. Danielle answered honestly. several times each month. You know why I stopped you? Brooks continued. Danielle paused briefly before speaking. I know you believe you had a reason. Brooks studied her face, searching for signs of nervousness that never appeared. You still have not told me exactly what your position is. Danielle smiled politely, though there was unmistakable weariness behind her eyes after such a long day. That information will become clear soon enough. Brooks shook his head with visible frustration. You seem very confident. Danielle answered without hesitation. Confidence comes from knowing the facts, not from assuming them. Those words settled into the silence between them. A moment later, the radio attached to Brooks' shoulder crackled back to life. Unit 12. Dispatch to Unit 12. Brooks immediately reached for the microphone. Go ahead. The dispatcher sounded more formal than before. We are attempting to complete your verification request. Please remain at your current location and do not take additional enforcement action until verification is complete. Brooks blinked in surprise. That wording was unusual. Copy, he answered, though his confidence had begun to fade around the edges. He lowered the microphone slowly while looking back toward Danielle. She had not moved an inch. She simply stood beneath the flashing lights with remarkable patience, her eyes following the quiet movement of distant traffic instead of the officer watching her. Brooks could not explain why, but for the first time that evening, the certainty he had carried to the driver's window was beginning to feel much heavier than the badge resting over his heart. Somewhere beyond the highway, a telephone had already begun ringing inside a federal office, and before anyone on that roadside realized it, the conversation unfolding miles away was about to determine what happened next. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire highway. Officer Brooks stood beside his cruiser, one hand resting lightly against the open driver's door, while his eyes remained fixed on Danielle Carter. Every instinct he had trusted for nearly 2 decades urged him to stay in control of the situation. Yet the unusual response from dispatch refused to leave his mind. He replayed Danielle's words over and over. Verify exactly who you are speaking with. It had sounded less like a warning and more like professional advice, offered without anger or arrogance. Danielle remained composed beneath the flashing lights, her attention drifting briefly toward the dark horizon where the first faint signs of approaching dawn still remained hours away. She thought about the files inside her briefcase. Every page represented months of interviews, evidence reviews, and legal preparation. The meeting she had been traveling toward could not begin without her, yet she refused to let frustration replace discipline. She had spent her career asking others to respect legal procedure. Tonight she intended to do exactly the same. Inside the patrol vehicle, another alert appeared across the computer screen. This one did not provide additional details. Instead, it displayed a simple message requesting immediate supervisory awareness before any further enforcement decision. Brooks stared at the notice longer than he cared to admit. He had rarely seen that language during a routine traffic stop. His confidence remained, but certainty had begun giving way to curiosity. He opened the driver's side of Danielle's sedan once more, taking care not to disturb anything inside. The leather briefcase remained exactly where it had been earlier. Beside it rested a government-issued laptop sealed inside a protective case bearing official federal property markings. Several neatly organized folders displayed printed labels identifying court divisions and case numbers, though the specific contents remained concealed. Everything about the vehicle reflected discipline, preparation, and professionalism. Nothing resembled the disorder Brooks had expected to find. Danielle noticed him examining the materials again. Those documents are part of active federal work, she said calmly. Thank you for handling them carefully. Brooks closed the door without replying. For the first time since initiating the stop, he found himself looking less at the car and more at the person standing beside it. Danielle never raised her voice. She never argued. She never attempted to impress him with titles or credentials. Instead, she consistently chose patience over confrontation. That quiet confidence unsettled him far more than anger ever could have. His shoulder radio crackled once again. Unit 12, dispatch. Brooks immediately answered. Go ahead. The dispatcher spoke carefully, choosing each word with unusual precision. Verification is still in progress. We have contacted the appropriate federal office. Please remain on scene. A supervisor has been notified. Brooks lowered the microphone slowly. A supervisor? For a routine traffic stop? He looked across the shoulder of the highway toward Danielle, who simply acknowledged the update with a small nod, as though she had expected nothing less. Passing traffic continued flowing steadily, unaware that a simple roadside stop had quietly expanded. Beyond the local jurisdiction, hundreds of feet away, headlights came and went without interruption, while somewhere many miles from the highway, lights inside a federal building remained on well past midnight. Phones were being answered. Records were being confirmed. Conversations were beginning that Officer Brooks could neither hear nor imagine. Standing beneath the steady rhythm of flashing emergency lights, Danielle took one slow breath and looked toward the dark road ahead. She knew the truth did not need to arrive quickly. It only needed to arrive completely. And with every passing minute, that moment was drawing closer. The quiet hum of the highway was interrupted by the sharp tone of Officer Brooks' shoulder radio. Unit 12, stand by for priority traffic. Dispatch announced with a level of formality that immediately caught his attention. Brooks answered without hesitation. Unit 12 standing by. There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of another voice joining the channel, one he did not recognize. It was calm, measured, and unmistakably professional. Officer Brooks, this is the communications supervisor. We need you to confirm that the driver on your traffic stop is Danielle Carter. Date of birth matching the credentials you submitted. Brooks glanced toward Danielle before reading the information from her driver's license. Confirmed. Another pause followed, longer this time. Even the passing traffic seemed quieter as Brooks waited for the response. Danielle remained where she had been instructed to stand, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon rather than the patrol car. She had heard enough radio traffic throughout her career to recognize when an ordinary conversation became something else entirely. She did not smile. She did not appear relieved. She simply waited. Finally, the radio came alive again. Officer Brooks, do not conduct any further investigative actions. A federal verification officer is now on the line. Brooks felt his grip tighten around the microphone. Federal verification? He repeated. Affirmative, the voice answered. Please remain at your current location while we complete identity confirmation. Brooks looked back toward his computer screen, where another secure notification had appeared. This one required supervisory acknowledgement before it could even be opened. For the first time that evening, he realized the situation had quietly moved beyond the routine procedures he knew so well. Danielle watched him from several yards away, noticing the subtle change in his posture. His shoulders no longer carried the certainty they had only minutes earlier. Questions had replaced assumptions, although pride still prevented him from saying so aloud. A cool breeze crossed the shoulder of the highway, lifting a few loose strands of Danielle's hair as another tractor-trailer rolled past, its headlights briefly illuminating the reflective lettering on the side of the patrol vehicle. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called into the darkness, while overhead the stars remained hidden behind a thin layer of drifting clouds. Time continued moving forward, indifferent to everything unfolding below. Brooks finally stepped away from the cruiser and approached Danielle once again. His voice remained professional, though noticeably more restrained. You said you work for the United States Attorney's Office. Danielle nodded. Yes. Is there anything else you believe I should know? Brooks asked. Danielle considered the question carefully before answering. Only that every decision made tonight will eventually be reviewed through the same legal standards that apply to everyone else. Her words carried no hostility. They sounded like a simple statement of fact. Brooks studied her face, searching for any sign that she intended to use her position to intimidate him. He found none. Instead, he saw only remarkable patience and quiet confidence. Moments later, the radio sounded again, but this time the dispatcher spoke with unmistakable urgency. Unit 12, your watch commander is en route. Estimated arrival is 6 minutes. Continue to hold your current position. Additional instructions will follow. Brooks slowly lowered the microphone, staring into the darkness beyond the highway as the significance of those words settled over him. Watch commanders did not respond to ordinary traffic stops. In the middle of the night, whatever was unfolding had already reached people far beyond the county line, and somewhere inside a federal office, a final confirmation was about to transform everything he believed he understood about the woman standing quietly beneath the flashing lights. The first sign that everything had changed was not the arrival of another patrol car. It was the silence that settled over the radio after the last transmission. Officer Ethan Brooks stood beside his cruiser, watching the empty highway while the flashing lights continued washing over the pavement in slow, steady waves. The confidence that had guided every decision earlier that evening had begun giving way to something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Danielle Carter remained exactly where she had been asked to stand, her hands resting comfortably in front of her, her expression composed despite the growing attention surrounding a stop that had started as routine. She had not raised her voice once. She had not demanded special treatment. She had simply trusted that facts would eventually speak louder than assumptions. Minutes later, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. They moved steadily toward the scene before slowing behind the patrol vehicle. A county command vehicle rolled onto the shoulder, and the watch commander stepped outside almost immediately. His face was calm but serious as he approached Officer Brooks without haste. Before either man spoke, the commander's phone rang. He answered after a quick glance at the screen. "Yes, sir," he said respectfully. Brooks could hear only one side of the conversation, but he noticed the commander's posture become noticeably more formal. After listening for nearly a full minute, the commander replied, "Understood. I will handle it personally." The call ended, and for several seconds the commander remained perfectly still. He then walked directly toward Danielle. "Ms. Carter," he said politely, "thank you for your patience this evening." Danielle nodded with quiet professionalism. "Thank you for coming." The commander turned back toward Brooks before speaking in a measured voice. "Her identity has been fully verified." Brooks waited for additional information, expecting another explanation or clarification. Instead, the commander continued. "Danielle Carter serves as an assistant United States attorney. She is traveling on official federal business related to an active legal matter." The words seemed to hang in the night air. Brooks instinctively looked toward Danielle, then back at the commander, as if hoping he had misunderstood. The commander continued before Brooks could respond. The United States Attorney's Office confirmed her assignment directly. They also confirmed that the delay created by this stop interrupted a scheduled federal proceeding. Brooks felt every assumption he had made earlier begin collapsing under the weight of verified facts. Danielle never smiled. There was no satisfaction on her face, only the quiet dignity she had carried from the beginning. She reached calmly into her purse after receiving permission and removed a federal credential enclosed inside a protective wallet. The commander examined it only briefly before returning it with both hands. "Everything matches," he said. Danielle placed the credential away without ceremony. She looked at Officer Brooks with neither anger nor triumph. "I told you the truth from the beginning," she said gently. "I simply asked that my identity be verified before conclusions were made." Brooks opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. The flashing lights still reflected across the highway exactly as they had 30 minutes earlier, yet the entire scene felt transformed. The authority he had relied upon had not disappeared, but it now carried a reminder he would never forget. Procedure mattered. Verification mattered. Assumptions did not. As another quiet breeze crossed the shoulder of the road, the commander's radio sounded once more. A final message arrived from dispatch confirming that representatives from the United States Attorney's Office had requested a complete review of the incident, and in that moment, everyone standing beneath those flashing lights understood that the traffic stop itself was over, but its consequences were only beginning. Morning arrived with a pale gray sky stretching across the county as the events from the roadside began moving through official channels far faster than Officer Ethan Brooks had imagined. The flashing emergency lights were gone. The highway had returned to its ordinary rhythm, and Danielle Carter had continued toward her destination after thanking the watch commander for handling the verification professionally. She never raised her voice before leaving. She never demanded an apology. She simply resumed the federal responsibilities that had been delayed by the stop. Inside the sheriff's headquarters, however, the night was far from over. Body camera recordings were immediately secured according to department policy. Dispatch recordings were preserved. Computer activity logs were archived. Supervisors assembled the timeline minute by minute, comparing radio traffic with digital records and written reports. No one rushed to conclusions because every decision would be expected to withstand careful review. Brooks sat quietly in a conference room, replaying the encounter in his own mind. He remembered Danielle's calm requests. He remembered her repeated suggestion to verify her identity before making further decisions. Most of all, he remembered how easily confidence had become certainty without sufficient evidence. Across town, representatives from the United States Attorney's Office confirmed the interruption had delayed a scheduled legal proceeding involving an active federal matter. They did not demand special treatment. They requested only a complete and objective review of the incident, exactly as any citizen would have the right to expect. That request carried significant weight, not because of Danielle's title alone, but because public trust depended upon every interaction being evaluated fairly. By early afternoon, Internal Affairs formally opened an administrative investigation. Brooks was informed that the review would examine the entire encounter, including communication, decision-making, and compliance with departmental procedures. Pending the outcome of that process, he was placed on administrative leave in accordance with agency policy. The decision was delivered respectfully and without public humiliation. It was not presented as punishment. It was presented as accountability while the facts were examined. Brooks accepted the notice in silence. For the first time in many years, the badge he had worn with unquestioned confidence felt heavier than it ever had before. Meanwhile, Danielle arrived at the federal courthouse only slightly behind schedule. Several colleagues greeted her with visible concern after learning about the unexpected delay. She offered only a brief explanation, refusing to exaggerate what had happened. Her attention quickly returned to the work waiting inside the courtroom, because she believed the justice system functioned best when people focused on principles rather than personalities. Later that evening, as investigators continued reviewing every recording and document, one observation appeared again and again throughout the preliminary reports. Danielle Carter had remained cooperative from beginning to end. She had followed every lawful instruction, spoken respectfully throughout the encounter, and repeatedly encouraged verification instead of confrontation. Those details mattered because they revealed a simple truth. The turning point had never been created by anger. It had been created by facts. Outside the courthouse, the sun slowly disappeared below the horizon, casting long shadows across the marble steps as another busy day came to an end. Miles away, Brooks sat alone reflecting on choices that had seemed routine only hours earlier. He finally understood that the most important moment of the night had not been the confirmation of Danielle's position. It had been the moment he chose assumption over verification. Everything that followed had grown from that single decision, and the review that now awaited him would measure not only what he had done, but whether every action reflected the fairness that the badge was meant to represent. Several weeks later, the official review reached its conclusion. Every body camera recording had been examined. Every radio transmission had been compared with written reports. Every timeline had been reconstructed minute by minute. The findings were based not on emotion or public opinion, but on documented facts. Investigators concluded that critical decisions had been made before available information had been properly verified, and those decisions failed to meet the professional standards expected of the department. As a result, Officer Ethan Brooks was formally separated from his position. The announcement received little fanfare. There were no dramatic press conferences, no shouting crowds, and no celebration. There was simply an official statement confirming that accountability had followed the evidence. Brooks left the building carrying a small box containing the personal items that had once sat on his desk. For years, he had believed experience alone guaranteed good judgment. Now he understood that experience without humility could become its own blind spot. Across the city, Danielle Carter learned the outcome through an internal notification from her office. She read the brief message quietly before locking her phone and returning to the legal files spread across her desk. One of her colleagues looked up and asked whether everything had finally been resolved. Danielle nodded once. "The review is complete," she answered. "That is all that matters." She did not speak about revenge because revenge had never been her objective. She did not measure justice by another person's loss. She measured it by whether the system remained willing to examine itself honestly when mistakes occurred. That afternoon she entered a federal courtroom carrying the same briefcase she had protected on the side of that highway. The hearing began on schedule. Witnesses were sworn in. Attorneys presented their arguments. The law continued moving forward exactly as it was designed to do, reminding everyone inside that courtroom that institutions earn trust only when principles are applied consistently to every individual. Months passed, and the traffic stop gradually faded from public conversation, but its lesson remained with everyone who had participated in it. New training sessions within the department placed greater emphasis on verification, communication, and impartial decision-making. Supervisors reminded officers that authority was never intended to replace careful judgment. Procedures existed for a reason, and every citizen deserved to be treated with fairness before conclusions were reached. Danielle never spoke publicly about the encounter beyond confirming the facts when required. She believed dignity often carried greater influence than anger, and she hoped the incident would be remembered not as a story about humiliation, but as a reminder that respect should never depend upon a person's appearance, profession, or background. Imagine standing on that quiet stretch of highway again, watching flashing lights reflect across the pavement while two strangers met under circumstances neither of them expected. One carried a badge. The other carried the responsibility of defending the law inside a courtroom. In the end, neither title proved more important than the principle connecting them both. Truth required patience. Justice required verification, and character revealed itself not when everything went according to plan, but when assumptions were tested by facts. The road where it all began looks no different today. Cars still pass beneath the same streetlights. The wind still moves through the same trees. Yet for those who remember that night, one lesson continues to echo long after the emergency lights disappeared. A badge can stop a vehicle, but it should never stop fairness. Real authority is not measured by the power to make assumptions. It is measured by the courage to seek the truth before making judgment.